So, starting our section on social dilemmas and collective action. So quick updates and reminders. Activity 6, as well as the outlines and the quiz that you recently submitted, will be graded as soon as possible. It's a lot to go through, so it might take me a little while, but it will be graded as quickly as I can get them graded. So, keep an eye out for that. Your grades will be up to date by the time we have Thanksgiving break. So if you kind of know where you stand, or you not kind of know, you know where you stand before we, head off for the rest of the semester. So again, there's an activity 8, but that's optional. So if you're satisfied with your grade and everything's up to date and you're okay with where your grade is, then you're completely done. You're done with the course. If you would like to replace one of your activities, you may submit activity 8. It's kind of self-guided, so there's a reading and some videos and an activity, but there's not a lecture associated with that. But you can use that particular activity to replace maybe one that you didn't submit or one that you don't think you did very well on, and it will replace that grade. Your activity 7 is due Sunday at 11:59 p.m. I usually they're due Friday, but I just went ahead and made it due Sunday to give everyone a little extra time. I think it's that time of year everyone could use, a little bit of extra time, and plus, like, I'll be grading all the other stuff, so it's not like I'll be able to get to it like immediately Friday. So you might as well be able to use that time to complete this particular activity. And please make sure to watch the supplementary videos and submit any extra credit, which is due November 21st at 11:59 p.m. And you may submit that on Canvas via the extra credit Dropbox. And you can submit stuff over time. I see everything that you've submitted. I've just kind of been checking periodically, but just so that I don't risk missing any submission from somebody, I'm just going to wait until the 21st to go through that and assign extra credit points. So submit that as soon as you can. Let me know if you have any questions, but other than that, let's get started. So, collective action problems. And for this particular lecture, we're just going to go over some, just broadly what we mean by collective action, what we mean by collective action problems, and some of the key terms and concepts that are important when discussing collective action problems. What's really good about this particular section, and although there is technically a section after this, which is the optional activity on equity, justice, and legitimation, I think kind of ending the class for many of you on collective action problems is in social dilemmas is a really good place to stop because it incorporates so many different aspects of things that we've covered throughout the semester. And that's mostly or really entirely because even though it's kind of its own area of study and interest, it really encompasses everything that is social psychology and sociology. It's asking those fundamental questions that at the end of the day, we're all trying to answer in some form or another. So, some of the major questions in collective action and, collective action, social dilemma research, or just that particular area, we're going to go over a few of those. So, the first one is, why do people cooperate in situations in which they could benefit more through selfishness? So, fundamentally, why is it that people cooperate when they have every reason not to? Um, we look at different situations like, whether that's between like in a classroom or among siblings or friends, but really we're thinking of this as more as like on the macro level. Why is it that people cooperate and are able to coordinate, maybe a whole social movement? How is it that they're able to cooperate to produce some sort of outcome that benefits everyone? That's not necessarily limited to a social movement, but it can be, creating like what we call public goods. So contributing to some kind of, whether that's through like one example of a public good is like, paying taxes. It goes to like funds like infrastructure and public schools and all this other stuff. And so that goes to like kind of this collective benefit. But you can also think of it in terms of like networks where there's a strong like reciprocity norm. So in these like broader, like if you've seen, I asked people in class if they had seen the movie Pay It Forward, and absolutely nobody raised their hand. So if you've seen it, great. If you haven't, I recommend watching it. It's a good movie. But in the movie, this little boy comes up with this plan on like, I can't remember exactly. This might be slightly off, but it's something like he's like basically drawing out this like network of all the people he knows and then all the people they know and so on and so forth. And it creates this whole wide map and something about like he's going to like pay it forward and then ask that person to do the same thing, like do something, you know, altruistic or generous or whatever the case may be, and then ask that person to do the same thing. And so when you're a part of these like broader networks where there's this expectation or norm of reciprocity and not necessarily direct reciprocity like we discussed in social exchange, but like a generalized exchange network. So you're like giving to this broader exchange network and you'll get something back. So like for example, when you do stuff that you're like, well, I hope somebody would do this for me. Like if you see it's raining outside and someone's window is rolled down, you might cover it up with a piece of plastic or something that you have in your car because you're like, well, geez, I would hope somebody, if somebody saw my car window down, they would do the same for me. And, when you have many people within a community, within a network doing these things, it, it's, it fosters trust, it fosters cooperation and cohesion. And so, one of the most fundamental questions in social psychology is why do people cooperate when they don't have to? Is it, what forces are working on them? Is it out of the goodness of their heart, right? Is it that altruism? Is it because there are certain social pressures? Why is it that people cooperate in these situations? And then it's why do people behave generously, often making great personal sacrifices in order to help others? And again, you can relate this to maybe our section on identity and social identity. Is that perhaps it's, identity verification, it's validating them in some way. Like, you think of yourself as being a good person, and so you're generous and you might make certain personal sacrifices because you conceive of yourself as someone who is, a generous and empathetic, giving, kind person. Or perhaps it's because you could think of like members of in groups. You more closely identify with members of your in group, and therefore there's higher levels of trust and reciprocity. So perhaps, that's one explanation. There's lots of reasons, but fundamentally, we're trying to answer questions such as these, like why do people cooperate and why are people generous and sacrifice their own well being, risking some sort of like punishment or cost to themselves simply for the sake of others. And then why do people behave in trustworthy ways when they could profit more by exploiting dependent partners? So, thinking back to our section on exchange and what sorts of factors create dependence. So, that would be someone having a higher value reward or resource, and the other person having few to no alternatives. It creates this relationship of dependence, and there's this, power imbalance. And what factors keep that person with more power from exploiting the person who's dependent upon them? Is it again out of the goodness of their heart? Are they altruistic? Or is it because there are certain social pressures acting on them? Like there are certain norms of, um, maybe they're kind of informal norms that you know you you know that this is what we do in this particular group, or there's more like explicit rules and regulations, and there's some sort of monitoring to kind of help mitigate the opportunities for exploitation, or whatever the case may be. You can think back to, you could explain some of these questions thinking back to any section that we've covered, is whether it's symbolic interaction, which is more so like a framework, or you could think of like affect and emotion, identity, exchange, status organizing, all of these different things. And so fundamentally, we're all trying to answer these questions. Why do people behave in trustworthy ways when they don't have to? Maybe it's reputation. Maybe that's a big factor. They don't want people to see them, exploiting somebody else. It would, then nobody would want to be friends with you or work with you, or, whatever the case may be. So, regardless of what question we're asking, many of us are trying to answer these questions. Even if someone is studying like prejudice and conflict and aggression, fundamentally they're trying to get at, well, why are people why do people act in selfless ways? Why do people cooperate? So you're just, you're looking at it from a different perspective, but ultimately you're trying to figure out the things that encourage cooperation and cohesion and trustworthy behavior and pro social behavior. So, a key term here to pay attention to is social dilemma. So, what we're going to be talking about, broadly, a social dilemma is a situation in which individuals' interested behaviors lead to collectively suboptimal outcomes, synonymous with collective action problems. So, when we say collective action problem or social dilemma, they're very much synonymous. And so, again, it's a situation in which individuals, when they behave in self interested ways, it results, like when you look at it collectively, these suboptimal outcomes. So when everyone's behaving in a self-interested way, the outcomes are suboptimal for everyone. Nobody really benefits when everybody's trying to like thinking in terms of like social exchange, when everyone's trying to maximize the rewards and minimize their costs, and they're behaving in these self-interested ways, everybody suffers. And of course, that's not the case for every single situation, but we're looking at something like, I use the example of traffic. And every time there's a lot of traffic, you might think like, why don't more people carpool or take public transportation or walk or like, travel at different times, whatever the case may be. But in certain areas where there's a lot of traffic, I mean, of course, like there's infrastructure issues and lack of public transportation being one, but um, there's a lot of issues there. But you're thinking to yourself, like, if we would all just like coordinate and cooperate and, not behave in self interested ways, if instead of, going out and driving to the store and run errands multiple times, I could just wait and like carpool with someone or, whatever. So it's like when everyone's behaving in self interested ways, like everybody suffers as a result. And so this essentially gets at what is called the problem of order. It's something that's fundamental to sociology as well as social psychology and various other disciplines. But ultimately, the most foundational question we're trying to answer is, why is there social order? And we call it the problem of order because we can't figure it out. It's not necessarily that it's a problem, like it's a bad thing, but it's a problem in the sense of like one that we want to figure out. We want to see how it works. Um, and we can't, why is there some sort of, pattern to what you might imagine would be this chaotic social world of everyone acting for the most part in their own self-interest? Like, how is it that we manage to coordinate with each other and cooperate on these, mass scales? And even though things seem like really chaotic right now, it is incredible to see how we are all like, even with like all the chaos, um, we all have managed to somehow cooperate with one another in many ways. Of course, like not everyone is necessarily like participating in that, but at the same time, we're still making it work. I mean, we're taking millions of people and we're making things work. Somehow society runs, and not always smoothly, but it somehow manages to stay relatively stable over time. Maybe not like in the present, but when you zoom out, things are relatively stable over time. we coordinate all these different events, and we coordinate in, on issues, and we cooperate to address issues. And even if it doesn't seem like it, when you zoom out, you see that, there are millions of people cooperating with one another and coordinating with one another, even if they don't necessarily 100% agree on things. It's amazing that, society is ordered in the sense of it's not just absolute chaos because we're all behaving in self interested ways. Some people think that perhaps society is ordered because there are, not necessarily saying that, okay, there's altruistic people and there's self interested people. And of course, I would imagine there are, but people sometimes behave in self interested ways and sometimes behave in more altruistic ways. And we have these norms of reciprocity and cooperation, and somehow we manage to make it work. In political science, they emphasize the role of government and formal institutions in coordinating our behavior. So, thinking back to, I believe it was your activity on identity, and how, thinking of your identity salience hierarchy, and how has that influenced your interactions within this particular institution? Like, how are your interactions different in school versus home versus at work versus at church versus at, wherever, whatever institution you can think of. And they're thinking strictly more formal institutions, as well as like government structures. And that's not necessarily like the federal government, but like local, state, regional government as well. So, and if you're thinking of that, on a very low level, you can even think of like more so as authority, these authority in like more formalized structures. So, like your boss, your school principal, whatever. Um, and so they say that being a part of these different institutions and being subject to different laws and regulations and norms and expectations is essentially what creates order in society. In economics, there's a focus on the functions of markets and competition, which is something you'll see in a video clip that's later on. So, yeah, there's this focus on markets and competition and how that drives and coordinates behavior. And then in psychology, they study altruistic motivations and emotions such as empathy and gratitude, and how might these emotions like empathy and gratitude contribute to this overall issue of social order. Again, like people aren't always behaving for the most part in self interested ways. Sometimes they um, are more altruistic, sometimes they experience more empathy than others. And because of this balance across, you know, all people, it kind of creates this, I don't know, counterbalance to one another. Like for every self-interested action, there's a more altruistic one. Um, and it creates like balance and order in society. In sociology, we emphasize informal interpersonal mechanisms, and that would be like norms or, relationships, norms, hierarchy, shared values, group solidarity. So we're looking at like how norms may shape human behavior and create order in society. Hierarchies are a really big thing right now. A lot of people are interested in how do different, hierarchical structures order society, and that could be on, hierarchy at work, at school. That could be a hierarchy based on class. A variety of things, and these can be like more formal or less formal hierarchies. And how might that order society? There's again also an interest in shared values and a common identity, and how that promotes cooperation and shared values and cohesiveness and trust, being able to unite under like one shared identity. And so these are the things that we might consider in sociology and social psychology when we're thinking about the problem of order. And so this video, I posted it like multiple times in multiple sections because it's very important. And if you haven't watched it, please, please, please watch it now. It's not very long, it's like 4 minutes. And it's so fundamental, not just to discussions of collective action and collective action problems, social dilemmas. It's fundamental to social psychology in general. So, this is kind of the key example that is given in terms of human behavior and the variety of variations it can take. And we're looking into those motivations and outcomes and how it creates order within society. And so, this, the prisoner's dilemma and the problem of order is answering, or rather, like providing some insight into why do individuals cooperate. And here it will show you some of those issues with cooperation. Is it's not just deciding, oh, I'm going to be cooperative. There's a lot of other factors. And so, please watch this video. It's very foundational, fundamental to being able to have a meaningful conversation and understanding about this particular section. And then there's also, and you can watch maybe halfway through, you could watch the whole thing. I think it's pretty interesting. I found this not too long ago, and it's about interest group formation. And they really discuss the problem of order, collective action problems, and discuss it from a variety of perspectives. They talk about a variety of social dilemmas, and it more so addresses or provides insight into why do groups of people cooperate, not necessarily why do individuals, but why do these larger groups, how do these larger groups coalesce and cooperate and coordinate, like how do grassroots movements start with just a few people, and then before you know it, there's this whole social movement. How to, like, specifically, this is interest groups, like let's say like um, animal rights organizations or different environmental groups. That's what they're discussing and to how they come to be. So some of the sources of cooperation that are most often cited, and I just kind of labeled these um, myself to give you kind of a clearer understanding. And so some of the main sources of cooperation are norms, rank, and relations. And another one that should be included, but it's applied more broadly, is that shared identity. That identity is incredibly important in terms of building and fostering trust and cooperation and cohesion. But for norms, we could focus on something like conformity, and the focus is on the prevailing norms and their enforcement. So thinking about like cooperation, more altruistic pro social behavior. You can think about norms in terms of there's like reciprocity norms within a particular group or within a particular, uh, like let's say you're on a sports team or you're in Greek life. You're expected to help your teammates, you're expected to help other members of your group and provide help and support when necessary because they're part of your in group, and there are these norms and expectations. And if you're not there, if you don't participate, if you don't contribute in some way, um, often there are social sanctions involved. But there are these different norms that encourage people to conform to certain expectations of behavior. And then we can think of something like rank and connect that to the section on status organizing. The focus is on the perceptions and rank of individuals and groups. So, why do people cooperate? Perhaps one explanation is because somebody of a higher rank told them to. And they're thinking, I'm of a lower rank, like I don't really have a lot of power or say. So, I'm just going to, you know, go along to get along. I'm going to put my head down. I don't want to cause any issues. I'm just going to cooperate because it doesn't really matter if I say anything. Or, I'm just going to cooperate because someone told me to cooperate. And, that there's a lot of power and authority. And so that's one way you could explain some sources of cooperation. And then finally, relations. And this could be related to social exchange as well as other things that we've discussed, but primarily we could think about it in terms of like social exchange because the focus is on the character and structure of relations connecting individuals. So how are people connected to one another? What binds them together? Again, like maybe is it a shared identity? Maybe it's a history of positive exchange and there's, a strong relationship built on trust and cooperation, whatever the case may be, it's looking into the nature of these bonds that we form with other people and how we're connected to one another. And perhaps we see each other as part of the in group, that because we're connected through, this our vast social networks, we see each other as being alike in some way, part of the same, group. And then a few key terms that we're going to cover is one is cooperation. So, cooperation is an individual behavior that benefits a group or collective. And then you have pro-social behavior, which is an individual behavior that benefits one or more others. And that sounds very similar, but keep in mind that cooperation is relational. It involves not just more than one person, because you have to cooperate with somebody or some entity, but cooperation also has shared outcomes to some extent. Whereas pro-social behavior, it's simply behavior. It can benefit someone, but there's not necessarily a shared outcome. So one example might be like, let's say you're in line at a stoplight and someone's trying to, pull out of their driveway into the street, and you see that someone's been waiting for a long time to pull out, so you stop your car before the driveway and motion to let them pull out of their driveway. And there's not really a shared outcome in that. It simply benefits the other person. It's really no cost to you. And so it's an individual behavior that benefits one or more others. And in this situation, it benefits the person in the car. And hey, maybe it benefits you too because you feel good about it, or, whatever the case may be. But that's pro social behavior. Whereas cooperation it doesn't necessarily require a transaction, but there's a shared outcome to some extent, like working on a group project or, let's see, working on a group project, different perhaps business arrangements. You could even think about like maybe like a neighborhood, even you could think of it on that level too, like on a neighborhood cooperation, and like neighborhood watch groups or something. A lot of people want to keep their neighborhood safe and like just kind of keep an eye on each other. um, and so they're all cooperating and coordinating in this larger network, and there's this shared benefit, there's a shared outcome as everyone benefits when people are participating. And which takes us to an issue that's discussed in the last video, the free rider problem, which is something we'll discuss later on. But for right now, keep in mind that cooperation, there's this shared outcome, it's relational, and pro-social behavior is simply behavior that benefits one or more others. And then finally, some key terms. Some more key terms are trust, the difference between trust, trusting behavior, trustworthiness, and trustworthy behavior. It's a lot of trust. So I divided it into these two different sections. So you have the concept and then the action. And then you have the concept and the action of that concept. So the concept of trust is the expectation that the other will cooperate despite the incentive to act otherwise. And the action of that, kind of like the verb form, is the behavioral dimension of trust, is acting in a way that leaves one open to exploitation by another. So, trusting behavior. Trustworthiness as a concept is an individual's motivation to honor rather than exploit another person's trust. But putting that, again, that's the concept, but putting that into action is trustworthy behavior, which is acting in a cooperative way toward another despite an incentive to do otherwise. So keep in mind, when we talk about trust and trustworthiness, it's the concept of what does trust mean? What does trustworthiness mean? And trustworthiness shouldn't be conflated with things like responsibility or honesty, even. It's simply, when we're talking about trustworthiness, we're talking about specifically an individual's motivation to honor rather than exploit another person's trust. So they're not exploiting people's trust. Not necessarily referring to any other virtues, so to speak. We're specifically just talking about that. Whereas the action form of these concepts are trusting behavior and trustworthy behavior. So keep that in mind as we move through this section. But other than that, I hope you all have a great day, and that's it. Thanks.